HannahSpanke is unafraid to speak her mind and share her unorthodox past as a way to empower others to live their authenticity. After nearly a decade in the adult entertainment industry, she has reinvented herself in becoming a successful intimacy and relationship coach. Hannah specializes in helping others become their happiest selves through both inner and outer work, while learning to understand and relate to their partners and family in the best ways possible. Hannah, let's go back to your own history. How did you get into the sex industry and get the energy to get out of it?
It wasn't something that was forced on me or anything like that. I definitely walked my way in, but I didn't really have it didn't click in my mind of what I was doing. You know, I didn't realize that I was entering this industry when I did it. I just saw it as, oh, I know that this is a possibility. I need the money right now. And it was a very like naive decision, the way that I made the decision. But I was 16 years old. Briefly backstory, I had a typically rough childhood. My parents separated when I was 5. I was with my dad solely from that point on until I was a teenager. And then I chose to move back in with my mom, who was struggling with severe drug addictions, very, very low income, the whole 9 yards. And so it was a month before my high school graduation. I was graduating 2 years early from high school. I was freshly 16, and I didn't have any money to go on my school trip to go to Disneyland. And that's where I wanted to go. And so this was on Craigslist before like Craigslist killer documentaries existed. And I hopped on Craigslist, I made a personals ad, and I wound up meeting somebody that night and ended up having sex with them for money. And it was a nominal amount of money, but in the moment, I thought that I was rich. Like I thought that I had really done something for myself. It was a very split experience. And on one hand, I was feeling this weird sense of empowerment, like, wow, I just did that. I just created money out of nothing. But on the other hand, there was definitely a traumatic impact that was playing out that I didn't really recognize until many years later, 6, 7 years later. I was having nightmares. I was having these like flash memories, a lot of anxiety in my body, feeling like, what the fuck did I just do? But at the same time, really being driven by the dollar sign, you know? And so that was my entrance. And then I paused for a couple of years, for about 1.5 years. And then at 17, using my fake ID, I started doing some house stripping type of work. So you have to have a social security card to go to a strip club and sign up as a stripper. I did not have that because I was under 18. And so I had a fake ID, and I knew I could use a loophole and do like the bachelor party type of work. And that was another traumatic experience in itself, because it was every boundary you could think of being crossed was crossed in those types of situations. Everybody's drinking, everybody's doing drugs, it's a very lax environment. And I didn't understand anything about what my own boundaries even were. And so again, it was just this split experience of like, on one hand, I have $400, $500, $600, $700 after a few hours of partying, and I thought I was having fun, or I was selling myself on the idea of having fun. And then dealing with the delayed effects later of feeling the anxiety, feeling the shame, that kind of stuff. And I just didn't really know what it was or how to name it or anything about how to process it. So that was when I was in my very first long-term relationship. He was very jealous, very controlling. So I paused that again. And then at the end of that relationship at 19, I started at the actual strip clubs full-time. And I did that for a little over 3 years full-time, longest job I ever held. And I started to really get worn down by that environment. It's usually surprising when I say this to people, when I tell my story, that when I was full-blown what you would call prostitution, like full-blown in that part of the chapter, which came in the middle and towards the end and after of the strip club 3 years, that was 10 times less traumatic and bothersome than being in the actual strip club, because the environment in that building is just such a low vibration, so much density, just so much pain in that building between everybody there, the people that are standard employees, the girls, the clients. It's kind of a cesspool of emotions. And so that started to wear on me, and I had a solid clientele. And so about 2 years in, I started taking what I called at the time my like golden goose egg clients out of the strip club, and I would arrange to meet them in hotel rooms or at their house, or wherever our arrangements were. And basically I just sold them on, we can do exactly what we do here, but for the same amount of money, I get to keep it. You don't have to pay to get into a club, and it's more private for you, and I am willing to do more. And so then I could up the price, and I started to get kind of high on this power trip, feeling like I was really in charge of something, like I was really dictating what went, what didn't go, and the money was by my design. I could say who I saw in the week, how much I did it, how much I charged, how much time I spent, all of the variables I was in control of. And it wasn't until probably 2018 when I got into my last long-term relationship before the one that I'm in now. And it was a very, very challenging dynamic for me to be doing that kind of work in this committed relationship. Obviously, I had multiple partners before that, like all short-term, few months, not more than a year. But they were serious committed relationships. And every time there was a different flavor of how that would present as a problem. And then in this one, it was a very, very karmic type of a soulmate. And so we had a lot to learn from each other. It was a very rough breakup after 3 years. But in those 3 years, I really finally started to wake up to the sort of delusion that I was under, that I was selling myself and just being validated by the culture of the lifestyle that I was living, that it was empowering, but really it was the absolute opposite. In order for me to make the money that I was making and I was feeling so proud of, I had to give the most intimate parts of myself away to people that I would never do that with for free, and so people like to use the argument to the position, the very leftist feminist kind of position, that like sex work is empowering for women that choose to do it. The argument I hear the most with that is that they're just selling a service. They're not selling themselves. They're just selling a service. But in my experience, that's absolutely not true. When you go get your oil changed in your car, that's a service. You don't care what the guy's wearing. You don't care what he looks like. You don't care if he has no teeth in his head. When it comes to my experience, that's a menu that the men get to choose from. Do they want a white woman? Do they want a black woman? Does she have tattoos? Does she have fake tits? The whole nine. And it wasn't until the pain of that relationship and all the conflict that my lifestyle was causing that I started to wake up to that reality and really realize, like, what am I doing? Like, I am creating so much pain for myself in exchange for these dollar amounts and this external validation. And then I saw my self-worth for what it was, like really on the floor. And then I was able to start there.
So this was a real flat on the ground moment for you, where you decided, look, I need to change something.
It was initially motivated again by external validation, wanting my boyfriend's approval. I could see that it was so problematic that he was not approving of me. And so I was willing to step out of the industry and start to kind of build my way back up for him initially. And then that was very short-lived because, again, it was external and it really is an inside job that needed to be done. And so I started to see that quickly. The conflict didn't go away just because I was stepping out of the industry. It was still the same issues, because now I can see it for what it is. That relationship that's what I was a match for at the time, because I believed I wasn't deserving of that approval. And so I was a match for someone that didn't approve of me. And when I started to really find myself and start to value myself and learn how to rebuild that from the ground up, I no longer was a match for that partnership. And then when that fell away, the industry, the lifestyle fell away, all of it kind of crumbled, crashed and burned all at the same time. Very, very rough year, but it really was like a phoenix from the ashes type of a situation where I was able to let it all burn, able to let it really like break me open so that I could completely flourish from that point on in a new way.
Yeah, you just mentioned breaking open. Was this the epiphany? Was this the most important lesson you learned as someone from that industry?
I would say so. Yes. The waking up to the realization that I was in control of how much I was giving my power away left and right. That realization is what broke me. When I first really like felt that truth in my body, I cried for like 4 days, like straight. Like I couldn't get off the couch type of a thing, just completely just pouring out all of this unprocessed emotion. And that was really what opened the door for me to start processing the last 8 years of my life.
Yeah. If we talk about this industry, one has to, of course, mention the human trafficking, the coercion.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
on the one hand, and then you say there are some women who go into the industry voluntarily. What would you say to young women contemplating to go into this industry?
Yeah, if they're contemplating to volunteer themselves in the way that I did, I would suggest really do some journaling, do some meditating, sit with the question of why? Why does it seem like a good idea to you? You know, would your brother or your best guy friend or your ex-boyfriend, would he think it was a good idea for him to do it? You know, I'm not exactly sure what it looks like in Spain when you're driving down the street, but I know here in the States, at least, unless you're in Las Vegas, you don't see billboards of naked men. You see them of women, you know, and so the seeds are planted all around us that commoditizing our body is an option. And it becomes something that we unconsciously think is an idea of our own. But what I've learned in my own experience is it's not. It's something that we're really kind of groomed into culturally. And then it's like, oh, I could do that. But it's not truly a self-sourced idea.
Yeah, good that you're mentioning that. What percentage of women do you think come from abusive family situations, abusive relationships that decide to go into this industry?
100. I would
Okay.
say 100% on some spectrum. You know, it could be the most severe situation. Many of the girls I worked with in the strip clubs were in active abusive relationships with their partners, with their parents, coming to work with like bruises, that sort of a thing, drug problems, alcohol problems. But at the very least, which I thought I fell into the like non-severe category, childhood trauma, things to do with parents that left those wounds in the very beginning of their lives that injured the self-worth a long time ago, and then now it's showing itself through those decisions.
Okay. So let's go to your own transition. Obviously, you've done a lot of self-work. You've done a lot of reflection, using your own traumatic past to now help others.
Yes.
Now, what is an intimacy coach?
Yeah. So I use different names. I use them kind of interchangeably: sex coach, intimacy coach, relationship coach, life coach, because really it all ties together. You can't work on one without acknowledging the rest, you know? And so with the intimacy side of things specifically, I'm also a board certified clinical sexologist. And so I have kind of a two-sided approach to that sort of work, more of a clinical approach of like helping people actually understand their bodies, understand their anatomy, understand why certain things feel the way they feel, how their nervous system is in a freeze state, for example, and they aren't able to become aroused, like those types of more clinical experiences that need that help, but also the mental, emotional side, the spiritual side of things, the trauma, the emotional processing that needs to be done to really understand why is my external life not the way I want it to be when it comes to the bedroom, my relationships, my relationship with my family, and most importantly, the relationship with ourselves. And so that's what I help people wake up to in themselves. And so it's like, the way I think about it, I feel like I went through hell and back in my own self-worth journey. And so when somebody is not in that same position that I was in, but they're experiencing self-worth issues and they're choosing, you know, I say this a lot, we date the same partners just with different faces again and again and again and again, and repeat the same patterns until we learn why that's the pattern, and we can rise above it with our own choice from there. I feel very able to help people in almost any position they're in when it comes to those types of issues because of how extreme my experience of that was.
Yes. Now let's look at the physical side of things. Sex in marriage.
Yeah.
I read a statistic that about 1 in 5 couples live in sexless relationships, and
Mm,
many more couples have hardly or any sex or very little sex. And on the other
yeah.
hand, there's that external world telling us all the time, this is how you live a life of bliss. I think there's a
Right.
disconnect there, okay?
Yeah.
Now, what would you tell couples? Where do you start with couples that have no sex life?
Yeah. So I start with the individual. Always, I start with the individual, because when people come to me as a couple for a couple issue, 10 times out of 10, it's not a couple's issue. It's an individual issue, and it's just presenting itself. Like, that's the symptom, is the relationship is being impacted. But first and foremost, the roots are in the individuals. And so on the female side of things, I often look, and this applies to both genders for sure, but I start with women here because of just the culture around shame and all the stuff to do with sex and sex culture. Pornified everything really has a large impact. And if anybody went to a regular, typical public school or otherwise, probably, I can guarantee they did not get the sex education they needed in order to understand their body as a woman or to understand female bodies as a man. We have different arousal processes. We have different physical experiences, literally, of pleasure. And that's typically where I start. I try to understand, what does she know about her body? What is she able to access in herself? If she was locked in the closet with a vibrator, would she have success? Does she have any blocks in herself with her own sexual expression, her own sexual experience? Because if she does, that's going to 100% show up in the shared connection. And then on his side as well, does he have things that he learned from porn, for example, where he doesn't understand what she needs and thinks it's this, but really it's that? Does he have an expectation that if he isn't doing something that's making her come in 5 minutes, then he's a failure as a man, and now he's internalizing shame, and he might start to experience issues in that department because of his own anxiety, his own stuff. And culturally, for men, there's so much shame around emotions. And so it's like, I really try to bridge those gender gaps and help each other, whether it's a same-sex couple or not. I try to help the partners understand what the internal experience is for the other person.
That's the physical side. Obviously, there's also a connection between the sexual and the spiritual, but that side is
Yes.
often just not talked about, because what did we have in our history? The church using sex as a control mechanism to control believers. This is what you can't do, and this is a sin, and so forth. So there's a lot of stigma attached to sexuality. How do you connect the two?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I love that question so much. So I really came into this work with a blank slate when it comes to that. I wasn't raised in any particular religion or belief system. And then I found my own spirituality as an adult. And so I think that's been really helpful in helping me support people who were raised maybe Catholic or Mormon, or the branches of religion that are very shameful and have a lot of stuff around it when it comes to sex. Because I don't have any judgment. I don't have any personal experience to say, oh, well, this is how it should be, this is how it shouldn't be. And so I can really create, first and foremost, I think the important thing is I can create a safe space for people who were raised in that sort of culture to share their experience with me. And then coming from my expertise, I can help them understand through every lens, physical, spiritual, emotional, sexual, what the truth is. And like capital T truth, like the sky is blue truth, not what do you think it is? What do I think it is? But what is the truth? And to me, what the capital T, like most spiritual truth is when it comes to sex, and I will stand by this forever, is that we all came from sex. None of us would be here alive on this planet if somebody didn't have sex before us. We are literally in our nervous system, in our cells, wired for pleasure. Why would any of that exist? Why would that be the means to our existence if it was supposed to be something we were disconnected from. You know, it's like, if there was shame around using your right hand, how fucked up would our culture be? Like, we would all be so limited. We'd be trying to do everything in a backwards way, just because we were taught and told that this thing is bad, but it's a part of our body. And what I believe personally is that our body is God, our body is Buddha. Like, all of the wisdom, all of the power we need in this lifetime lives in our body already. And the more we can connect with it, the more we can trust our body and listen to our intuition and have that mind, body, spirit connection, the more access we have to all of that beautiful functioning that we were built to experience.
Yeah. Well, this is the crucial difference between religion, which is rules-based, and experiential spirituality, which is, as you just explained, experience and God-given. What do you feel? What do you experience within?
Right. And there's nothing wrong. Like, that's what I've seen to be the biggest help for people who have come from religious households, is like, just the validation that nothing your inner experience is nothing you're experiencing internally is wrong. And just taking that black and white, right, wrong, moralistic piece off the table frees up so much space for them to start to reconnect to their human nature.
Yeah, of course, religion places such a big emphasis on the question of trust and infidelity.
Yeah, I see that issue really tied into the disconnect between men and women, the disconnect in ourselves, or even knowing that we need to learn how to express what we want, how to express what we need when it comes to the bedroom or outside of the bedroom. Because, and sometimes when I say this to my male clients, they're like, oh, that's not true. I could get a hard on over anything. Everything starts with your heart. If your emotions are not feeling fulfilled, if your emotional needs are not being met on some level, that's going to have an impact in how your sexual pleasure is either available to you, limited to you, being overused, being abused, being, you know, where the health is on that at any given moment. This is the access point, no matter what you have downstairs, you know. And so for women, they're very validated when I say that. Usually they're like, yeah, I just want to feel connected to him. I want to feel like he understands me. Then I'd be willing to have more sex. And the man side of things, usually they're like, they don't consciously have the awareness as often that is an issue. But once we start digging into it, it is. Like, if they don't feel desired, if they don't feel like they're appreciated for all the work that they do, you know, the world is on their shoulders most of the time to provide, to protect, to make sure everything is good. And they don't really get the space to feel things. And so once we start creating space for that, the emotional truths to come out, that's when I think the sexual connection can be sustained. And I see so much of the infidelity issue is just really rooted in emotional disconnect. Not knowing what you feel, not knowing what they feel, not knowing how to communicate those things. And so we seek it elsewhere.
Yeah. Obviously, something is wrong in the relationship if one of the partners seeks pleasure somewhere else. We haven't learned to talk about our desires and our needs. We don't take the time. We don't take the time to talk about it. I mean, some therapists recommend scheduling sex. How do you see that?
So I think that can be supportive, but it's like a training wheels kind of supported. Like, it's not the way you want to live forever, probably, but it can help when things are rocky, things are very disconnected. It can help to have like a dedicated Friday night. This is our time. Whether we have sex or not, this is our time to connect. Because when everything in life gets put first, the kids and the job, and then the kids, and then the job, and then, oh, I'm tired at night, and so we're going to go to bed early. We have stuff to do in the morning. Like, all of that stuff constantly gets pushed first. The relationship needs and the personal needs for each partner get put back and back and back on the back burner until they're like completely taken off the stove. And then that's when all of the I think, leaky energy starts to happen. People start to go find to meet their needs other places, because there's no more priority around it in the relationship. And this is truly something that takes teamwork. Both partners
Yeah.
have to be willing to put that first, to make it a priority, to maintain their connection. And oftentimes when I work with couples with children, that's their biggest like excuse or reason, is that, oh, well, we have kids. We have to do this. We have to do that. They need us. I promise you,
Yeah.
guaranteed across the board, your child is going to be fine if you set 3 hours a week aside for them to be with a babysitter or their grandma or somebody for you and your partner to maintain your relationship, because that is the household you're creating. It doesn't matter how much time you're available for the children, they're being impacted negatively if your relationship is falling apart behind the scenes.
Yeah. And we have to also talk about the whole issue of hormones.
Yeah,
Obviously,
absolutely.
it goes through cycles and going into menopause. Well, it's just not talked about, but there are cycles in life. How do you address
Yes.
that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most common one that applies to every relationship, like no matter the age, is just the transition from the honeymoon phase into the next chapter of the relationship. So I tread lightly with that term because I do often say the honeymoon phase doesn't have to end. And that's what when I say that, I mean like the intentional creation of romance and passion and those things to be maintained that I think is absolutely possible. But the honeymoon phase on a hormonal level, all the oxytocin that we're getting all the time when we see our partner, the excitement, the dopamine hits that are like a little over exaggerated for that first year or so, that does change. And so people often think because we just don't have the knowledge around this widespread, we don't understand why things are changing. They start to believe that, oh, it's me, or oh, it's them. The relationship is getting stale. The relationship is falling apart. But really it's not. It's just transitioning. And just like anything else that transitions, the seasons outside are our own chapters of life. You know, you're not a child forever. You're not a teenager forever. You're not a young adult forever. And so same thing, we just have to learn how to have reverence, I think, and honor those cycles of the relationship and get excited about what that new chapter has to offer. The more mature, settled version of it after that honeymoon effect starts to wear off, I think is really important for couples to be educated about so that they can get excited about it and not think that something is just going wrong. But on the menopause side of things, so being a clinical sexologist, I do work with many women around that. Pre-menopause, during it, and post, because a lot of things change, including women going through pregnancies afterwards with the postpartum, all of the hormonal shifts going on during the postpartum period, which can be months or up to like a year. And sometimes that creates a lot of tension in the relationship. And again, I think it comes down to the lack of education. We don't understand why things are so hard in that moment. We don't understand how to nurture ourselves and how our partner needs to be nurtured when those changes are going on. And so it always, I think, is going to circle back to that communication. Can we tell our partners what we need? Can we tell our partners what we want? Maybe when you were 35, you could, as a woman, you could just be wet in a matter of a couple of minutes and you were really ready to go quicker than when you're 55. Maybe you need some sort of a lube, or you need to have longer amounts of foreplay, etc. And so it's two things that come to mind. Number one, having reverence for your own experience, allowing it to be okay, not making yourself wrong for those changes. And then number two, trusting that your partner wants to meet your needs and allowing yourself to be vulnerable with communicating what those needs are.
Yeah. In essence, the takeaway I get here is that you need to talk about these things. There's so much stigma attached that we have to really learn it, I think, from a young age. I think it starts with sex education in schools. That's where I think many of it goes wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have like a blip of a memory about my sex ed class in high school. It was maybe 2 periods worth of the whole entire school year once in high school. And the only thing I remember them talking about was STDs. That's it. Like nothing about arousal, nothing about the anatomy, nothing about the difference between men and women, nothing about what's supposed to happen, like absolutely no preparation. And so people turn to porn I believe this is a statistic in the States, at least. I don't know where the study was done, but over 60% of adults over the age of 25 report that they learned how to have sex from porn. And that's horrific, because porn is not real. You know, it's staged, it's performative, it's meant to create an emotional experience that's over exaggerated in the viewer, and it's absolutely so far from reality. And so then we internalize even more shame, thinking, oh, I should be like this, I should be like that, this is how I'm supposed to sound, this is how it's supposed to go. And then when it doesn't, we think our bodies are broken and we feel like we're wrong, and then we shut down even more.
Yeah, I think this is the real problem with teenagers that we're having at the moment, this oversensitizing and getting their sex education from porn, which is creating a real problem.
Yeah, totally. Because then it's just like on Instagram, like that little tiny old reptilian part of our fear brain that used to be really helpful when we were running from a predator. Now it's just ignited all day long when somebody doesn't like your Instagram post fast enough, you know? And so we're seeing like depression and anxiety and these eating disorders and all kinds of identity crises in children, younger and younger and younger, because we have access to it all day long, to have this distortion in the chemicals in our brain that isn't real. And so the dopamine hit becomes prioritized, and then when it comes to our real lives, we don't understand how to connect and how to allow for those chemicals to naturally arise, whether it's in a regular conversation with a person or in a sexual encounter with somebody.
Yeah. Hannah, I want to acknowledge you for being so open about your own biography and what you went through. And I think in that way, you can help many people who are going through relationship problems, who are having issues with their sex life. I really want to thank you for this conversation. I think we could really have hour-long conversations about this topic. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been very enjoyable.